A white police officer humiliates a black woman during a routine stop, unaware that the woman he belittled is about to become his new boss, turning his world upside down in a way he never saw coming. Officer Jake Thompson cruised slowly down Main Street in his patrol car, his sharp eyes scanning for anything out of the ordinary. He was a man molded by decades of service in this town, hardened by years of dealing with what he saw as the worst of humanity. Over time, his compassion had eroded, replaced by a stern resolve to maintain order at all costs. Jake had a reputation. He was known for being tough, for not backing down, and for having a particular way of dealing with the town's black residents. Many whispered that he was a bully, especially towards those who didn't belong. But Jake didn't care what people thought. He saw himself as a protector, a guardian of his town, and if that meant stepping on a few toes, so be it. As Jake turned onto Maple Avenue, his eyes caught sight of a sleek black car pulling out from the curb. The car was new, shiny, and didn't fit in with the other beat-up trucks and sedans lining the street. He watched as it merged onto the road, and something about it made him uneasy. Maybe it was the car's smoothness, or maybe it was just a slow day, but Jake decided to follow it for a while. Inside the car, Lisa Jefferson adjusted the rear-view mirror and took a deep breath. She had only been back in Millstone for a week, and already the familiar unease was settling in. The town hadn't changed much since she left years ago. Same small-town charm, same undercurrent of prejudice. Lisa had left this place as soon as she could, seeking a better life in the city, where she didn't have to constantly prove herself, where she could just be. Now, with a successful career under her belt, she had returned, hoping to make a difference, to change the town for the better. Lisa was well aware of the challenges ahead. She knew her presence would stir things up, but she wasn't one to back down from a fight. Her mind wandered as she drove, thinking about the community programs she planned to introduce, the changes she wanted to see. She was lost in thought when she noticed the patrol car in her rearview mirror. "Great," she muttered under her breath, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. Lisa had been driving just fine, but she knew what this was about. She had seen that look many times before, curiosity, followed by suspicion. It was the same look she had received when she walked into certain stores, or when she moved into her new home in the more affluent part of town. She wasn't surprised, but she was tired. Tired of being made to feel like she didn't belong. Jake watched the car's taillights as it slowed down, then sped up slightly. He flipped on his lights and signaled for the driver to pull over. The car obediently moved to the side of the road, and Jake felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. He parked behind the car and got out, adjusting his belt as he approached. The woman inside the car had already rolled down her window, her face calm but guarded. "License and registration," Jake said curtly, not bothering with pleasantries. He leaned in slightly, trying to get a better look at the woman. She was well-dressed, her makeup flawless, and there was an air of confidence about her that Jake didn't like. He took the documents she handed him and scanned them quickly. "You know why I pulled you over?" "No, officer," Lisa replied, her voice steady but laced with frustration. "Was I speeding?" Jake ignored the question, choosing instead to focus on her out-of-state license. "What brings you to this part of town?" he asked, his tone implying that she had no business being there. Lisa took a slow breath, willing herself to stay calm. "I live here, just moved back." "Is that so?" Jake's eyes narrowed as he looked her over. "You sure you're in the right neighborhood?" The question hung in the air, thick with insinuation. Lisa felt a surge of anger rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. She knew what he was doing, and she wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. "Yes," she said, meeting his gaze. "I'm sure." For a moment, they stared at each other, the tension crackling between them. Jake could feel the challenge in her eyes, and it infuriated him. Who did she think she was, coming back here and acting like she owned the place? He stepped back, deliberately taking his time as he wrote out a citation. When he handed it to her, Lisa took it without a word, her expression unreadable. "You have a nice day now," Jake said, his voice dripping with condescension. He turned and walked back to his car, feeling a grim satisfaction. But as he watched her drive away, a small, nagging doubt crept into his mind. Something about her was different, and it unsettled him. Lisa drove off, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the wheel. She could feel the weight of the encounter pressing down on her, the old familiar anger and hurt bubbling up, but she wouldn't let it consume her. She had come back to this town for a reason, and she wasn't going to let one bigoted cop deter her. Lisa resolved to handle this her way. This was just the beginning, and she had every intention of seeing it through, no matter what obstacles came her way. Little did Jake Thompson know, the woman he had just humiliated was about to turn his world upside down. Lisa Jefferson pulled into her driveway, the engine of her car purring softly as she sat there for a moment, letting the events of the day sink in. The encounter with Officer Thompson had left her feeling rattled, a mix of anger, frustration, and a deep, simmering sadness welling up inside her. She had grown up in this town, but it had never truly felt like home. The same streets she had once walked as a child now felt hostile. The same people who had once smiled at her now looked at her with suspicion. The house before her was the one she had grown up in, an old, modest home that held both cherished memories and painful reminders of the past. Her parents had done their best to shield her from the harsh realities of life in a town where she was often seen as the other, but some things couldn't be hidden. The racial slurs whispered behind her back, the subtle exclusions, the way people seemed to expect her to fail. It had all left its mark. As Lisa stepped out of the car, the cool evening air hit her face, and she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She walked up the steps to her front door, her mind replaying the encounter over and over again. The way Officer Thompson had looked at her, with that mix of disdain and authority, as if she were nothing more than a nuisance to be dealt with. The way he had questioned her right to be in her own town, her own neighborhood, as if she didn't belong. It had taken every ounce of restraint to keep her voice calm, her hands steady, and her temper in check. She had seen enough news stories to know how quickly situations like that could spiral out of control. Inside her home, Lisa slumped into a chair, her hands still trembling slightly. The silence of the house was both comforting and suffocating. She had come back to Millstone to make a difference, to be a positive force in a place that had so often made her feel invisible. But today reminded her just how difficult that would be. The same old prejudices still lingered, just as insidious and pervasive as ever. She closed her eyes, trying to push away the negative thoughts, but memories of her childhood kept flooding back. Being followed in stores, being called names on the playground, her parents telling her to be twice as good, to be seen as equal. She had escaped this place once, carving out a successful life for herself in the city where she didn't have to constantly fight for every bit of respect. But now, it seemed like nothing had changed. Yet, despite the anger and the hurt, there was a resolve growing within her. Lisa knew she couldn't let this go. She couldn't let Officer Thompson's actions slide by without consequence. But she also knew that confronting him directly, or filing a formal complaint, might not be the best course of action. Millstone was a small town, and its power structures were deeply entrenched. She needed to be strategic, to find a way to address the problem without making herself a target. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Jake Thompson was sitting at the local diner, sharing a coffee with his fellow officers. To him, the incident with Lisa was just another routine stop, another day on the job. He barely gave it a second thought as he recounted the story to his colleagues, smirking as he described how he put her in her place. They laughed along with him, trading stories of their own encounters with the town's black residents. It was all in a day's work, they thought, just another way to maintain order in Millstone. But there was something different about this time, something that lingered in the back of Jake's mind. He pushed the thought aside, choosing instead to focus on the camaraderie with his fellow officers. After all, they were the ones who had his back, the ones who understood what it meant to keep this town safe. Yet, as he sat there, a nagging feeling of unease began to creep in. He had heard whispers about the new police commissioner, rumors that this person was going to shake things up, crack down on misconduct, and bring change to the department. Jake brushed it off as just talk, but the thought still lingered. Back at the station, things weren't as calm as Jake believed. Complaints about his behavior and that of a few others had been piling up, and the higher-ups were beginning to take notice. The new commissioner hadn't officially started yet, but the atmosphere was already tense with anticipation. Change was coming, and Jake Thompson, with all his bravado and years of service, was not as untouchable as he thought. As the evening wore on, Lisa sat in her home, staring out the window at the quiet street. She had a decision to make. She could either let this incident fade into the background, another reminder of how far things still had to go, or she could take action. But what action? Filing a complaint might lead nowhere, or worse, it could make her a target for further harassment. Yet, doing nothing felt like conceding defeat. In that moment of reflection, Lisa realized that she couldn't fight this battle alone. She needed allies, people who understood her struggle, people who wanted to see change as much as she did. The town might be small, and its prejudices might run deep, but she wasn't the same girl who had left years ago. She had grown stronger, smarter, more determined, and now she had a purpose. As she sat there, the seeds of a plan began to take root. She would reach out to the community, gather support, and find a way to hold Officer Thompson accountable, not just for herself, but for everyone in Millstone who had ever felt marginalized, who had ever been told they didn't belong. This was just the beginning, and Lisa Jefferson wasn't about to back down. Not this time. Rumors had been swirling for days now, filling the quiet streets and echoing in hushed conversations. The new police commissioner was set to arrive today, and no one knew exactly what to expect. The town's police department, long accustomed to operating under the radar, was bracing itself for a shakeup. Officer Jake Thompson, however, wasn't particularly concerned. He had heard the rumors just like everyone else, but he had been in this town long enough to know that things rarely changed in any meaningful way. Millstone was a place where connections mattered more than competence, where who you knew could keep you safe from the consequences of your actions. Jake had built his career on those connections, on the unspoken understanding that the rules didn't always apply to him. He had survived multiple shifts in leadership before, and he was confident that he would do so again. As he drove to the station that morning, Jake's mind wandered back to the encounter with Lisa Jefferson. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, just another routine stop, another woman who needed to be reminded of her place. But as he pulled into the parking lot, a strange feeling of unease settled over him. He quickly pushed it aside, chalking it up to the anxiety surrounding the new commissioner's arrival. Inside the station, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Officers milled about, exchanging nervous glances and speculating about what the day would bring. The previous commissioner had been a complacent leader, content to let the department run itself with minimal oversight. But the whispers about the new commissioner suggested something different. A person with a reputation for being tough, for not tolerating misconduct, for bringing change wherever they went. No one knew the new commissioner's identity, and that only added to the growing anxiety. Jake walked through the station with his usual swagger, nodding at familiar faces and trying to project an air of confidence. But as he took his seat in the briefing room, surrounded by his colleagues, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The room filled quickly, and the chatter died down as the anticipation grew. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the new commissioner to make their grand entrance. The door to the briefing room opened, and a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned toward the figure stepping through the door. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the woman standing there, her presence commanding attention despite her calm demeanor. It was her, Lisa Jefferson, the woman he had humiliated just days ago, the woman he had dismissed without a second thought, was now standing at the front of the room, her gaze sweeping over the assembled officers. Jake's mind reeled as he tried to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be happening. His pulse quickened, and a cold sweat broke out on his brow. He had expected the new commissioner to be some faceless bureaucrat, someone who would come in, make a few changes, and then leave him to his own devices. But this was something else entirely. Lisa's expression was unreadable as she looked around the room, her eyes lingering for a moment on Jake before moving on. The intensity in her gaze sent a chill down his spine. She wasn't here to play games, that much was clear. The room was silent, the tension palpable as everyone waited for her to speak. "Good morning," Lisa began, her voice calm and steady. "I'm Lisa Jefferson, your new police commissioner. I know there's been a lot of speculation about what my arrival means for this department, so let me be clear. I'm here to ensure that we uphold the highest standards of accountability, fairness, and community trust. I expect each and every one of you to embody those values in your work." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jake felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he listened. The woman standing before them was not the same woman he had pulled over a few days ago. This Lisa Jefferson was composed, authoritative, and clearly determined to make her mark on the department, and she had the power to do it. "I'm aware that change can be uncomfortable," Lisa continued, her eyes scanning the room. "But change is necessary. It's necessary for this department, for this town, and for the people we serve. There will be no tolerance for misconduct, no excuses for failure to adhere to our professional standards. We are here to serve the community, and that means earning their trust every single day." Jake's heart pounded in his chest as Lisa spoke. He had never imagined that the woman he had so casually dismissed would be the one now holding his career in her hands. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him, and he knew that they were all thinking the same thing. How could this have happened? How had he not seen this coming? Lisa's speech was brief but powerful. She outlined her expectations, made it clear that she would be closely monitoring the department's conduct, and left no doubt that she was serious about making changes. As she finished, the room remained silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone. When Lisa finally dismissed them, Jake felt as if the floor had been pulled out from under him. His mind raced as he tried to figure out what to do next. Apologize, deny everything, pretend it had never happened. But as he watched Lisa leave the room, her head held high, he realized with a sinking feeling that there was no easy way out of this. The power dynamics had shifted, and for the first time in his career, Jake Thompson was truly afraid of what might come next. As the officers filed out of the briefing room, Jake stayed behind, his thoughts swirling in a chaotic mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. He had been so sure of his place in this town, so confident that his years of service and connections would protect him. But now, with Lisa Jefferson as his boss, everything had changed. He had humiliated her, and now she had the power to destroy him. But Lisa's demeanor, while professional, held an edge that told Jake she hadn't forgotten their encounter. The look she had given him, brief but searing, was a silent promise that there would be consequences. Jake knew he had to tread carefully from here on out. The woman he had tried to put in her place was now the one holding all the cards, and he was left wondering just how far she was willing to go to make him pay for what he had done. For the first time in his life, Jake Thompson realized he was no longer in control, and that terrified him. Jake's unease was palpable. He found himself second-guessing his every move, replaying the encounter with Lisa over and over in his mind. What was she planning? Would she call him out publicly? File a report? Fire him on the spot? The uncertainty gnawed at him, eating away at the tough exterior he had spent years building. His colleagues noticed the change. Jake, once the brash and confident officer who could command a room with a single glance, now seemed distracted, jittery even. The usual banter and camaraderie that had marked his interactions with the other officers were gone, replaced by awkward silences and forced smiles. Gossip began to spread through the department like wildfire. Rumors about his fall from grace, speculations about what Lisa might do to him, it all contributed to the growing sense of isolation Jake was feeling. Meanwhile, Lisa was making her presence felt. She had begun meeting with officers individually, getting to know them, understanding the dynamics within the department. Her approach was thorough and professional, but there was an undercurrent of determination that made it clear she wasn't here to simply observe. She was here to make changes, and everyone knew it. When it was finally Jake's turn to meet with Lisa, the tension in the air was almost suffocating. He had been dreading this moment, playing out every possible scenario in his head. He knew he had to face her, but the thought of what might happen left him feeling cornered and desperate. Jake knocked on Lisa's office door, his heart pounding in his chest. When she called him in, her voice was calm, betraying none of the emotions that he was sure were bubbling beneath the surface. He entered the room, noting the way Lisa was seated behind her desk, her posture relaxed yet authoritative. She gestured for him to sit, and he did, feeling like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. The silence stretched on for a few agonizing moments. Jake could feel the sweat forming on his brow as he tried to muster the courage to speak. When he finally did, his voice came out strained, lacking the confidence he usually exuded. "Commissioner Jefferson, I wanted to apologize for the other day," he stammered, the words tumbling out clumsily. "I didn't mean to." Lisa held up a hand, cutting him off. Her expression remained unreadable, her gaze piercing as she looked directly at him. The apology he had prepared, the one he had hoped would somehow lessen the tension, died on his lips. "I'm not here to talk about apologies, Officer Thompson," Lisa said, her voice steady and measured. "What happened between us the other day is not something I'm going to overlook, but it's also not the only issue we need to address." Jake blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. He had expected anger, maybe even outright hostility, but what he got instead was something far more disarming. A calm, almost clinical approach that left him feeling even more vulnerable. Lisa leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "This department has a problem, Officer Thompson. A problem that goes beyond just one incident or one officer. There is a culture here that has been allowed to fester, one that undermines the very principles we are supposed to uphold. Accountability, fairness, respect. These are not just words. They are the foundation of our duty to this community." Jake swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. The guilt he had been trying to ignore was now pressing down on him, heavy and suffocating. "I'm giving you a chance," Lisa continued, her tone firm but not unkind. "A chance to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. You've been here a long time, and whether you realize it or not, you have influence in this department. You can use that influence to help me change things for the better, or you can continue down the path you've been on. But I'm telling you now, the path you're on has no future here." Jake felt a lump form in his throat. This was not the conversation he had anticipated. He had braced himself for a confrontation, for Lisa to tear into him, maybe even fire him on the spot. But instead, she was offering him something else, a way out, a chance to redeem himself. Lisa's gaze softened slightly, though her resolve remained clear. I don't expect you to change overnight, Jake, but I do expect you to take this seriously. The days of turning a blind eye are over. I need officers who are committed to serving this community with integrity, and I believe you can be one of them if you choose to be. The room was silent again as Jake struggled to process everything she had said. He had spent so many years seeing himself as untouchable, as someone who didn't need to change. But now, faced with Lisa's calm authority and her unyielding commitment to reform, he realized just how wrong he had been. He nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. I understand, Commissioner. I'll do better. Lisa nodded, her expression softening just a fraction. I'm holding you to that, Jake. This department needs to change, and it starts with each of us. As Jake left her office, he felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, guilt, and a newfound sense of responsibility. The path ahead was uncertain, and he knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could be part of something better. Lisa watched him go, her own emotions tightly controlled. She knew the road to reform would be long and fraught with challenges, but she was ready. She had given Jake a choice, and now it was up to him to decide which side of history he wanted to be on. The confrontation was over, but the real work had just begun. If you enjoyed this gripping story filled with drama and unexpected twists, be sure to subscribe. Stay tuned for more compelling narratives that will keep you on the edge of your seat.